Good evening. Thanks everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. Oops, sorry. Thank you everybody for coming tonight to Camaraderie is Colorblind. Camaraderie is Colorblind is a panel discussion in honor of Black History Month and the Bet on Vets celebration that's going on here on campus and in the community in support of the more than 750 student veterans here at the University of Florida and the more than 1,000 student veterans at Santa Fe College. These veterans gave it all. They went and they served our country, they cared enough to go and do that, and now they're here for pursuing higher education, which is a very great feat for someone who hasn't gone and given up so much of their life already. But as they're here, we have some of our student veterans that are currently students and some that have been in the past here to participate in that. We have Dr. Michael Leslie, who's going to be moderating the panel tonight. He is an associate professor here at the University of Florida, and he is in the telecommunications department. He's doing research on media content and how it affects positively and negatively, I believe, African and African descendant.
That's close enough.
Close enough? I appreciate your generosity. I appreciate that. Thank you, Dr. Leslie. We're very grateful to have him. We're very grateful to have these veterans behind me that we can talk about this discussion about racial perceptions in the military and how we can transfer that into our society. So thank you all for being here, and I will now turn the time over to Dr. Leslie to moderate our discussion.
Okay, I'm you know, when I was, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to engage this distinguished panel, and also to have an opportunity to interact with you. Later on, we'll have an opportunity after the panelists speak about this topic for you to ask them questions. But I wanted to sort of set the stage for what we're going to be discussing today by first giving you some background information about the state of race relations in this country at this point in time. And I just did a brief literature review to get some data to share with you. So, you know, it's no secret that in 2016, racism is still prevalent in the United States. I mean, we have news reports from Ferguson, Missouri, from Charleston, South Carolina, from Sanford, Florida, indicating that people are still violently targeted because of their race. A recent poll by the Pew Foundation indicates that people of color still believe that they are turned down for jobs and other opportunities simply because of the color of their skin. But there's more data. Harvard professor Sendhil Mullainathan has gathered statistical evidence that shows that Americans continue to show racial bias in housing, in labor markets, and in retail markets. And I just want to share with you a couple things that have researchers have noted in more recent studies. I think everyone is familiar now with the University of Chicago study where they sent out resumes to employers, and some of them had African American sounding names and some didn't. And those that did not have African American sounding names were 50% more likely to receive callbacks. I think that's been widely discussed. But there are also there's other evidence that, for example, that when in apartment rentals on Craigslist, the stereotypically black names in response to apartment rental ads receive fewer responses than white names. When African Americans or non-whites show up for apartment rentals, they're usually told, or frequently told, that that rental is no longer available, or that the house is no longer for sale. All of this has been documented. that I found something interesting also. I mean, I should say the author of this, Harvard professor wrote this article, found that when iPads are auctioned on eBay, researchers randomly varied the skin color of the person holding the iPod for sale. And there were 20% more offers for iPods held by white hands than by non-white hands. So this is deeply ingrained in our society, kind of the racist response. And finally, I wanted to say something too about, I want to say two more things, I guess. There's an executive summary put out by the Leadership Conference, which is a group's civil rights coalitions in the United States. I'm just going to read verbatim from this report. This is their executive summary. Violence committed against individuals because of their race, religion, ethnicity, national origin, gender, identity, or sexual orientation remains a serious problem in the United States. In the nearly 20 years since the 1990 enactment of the Hate Crime Statistics Act, the number of hate crimes reported has consistently ranged around 7,500 annually. That's nearly one every hour of every day. Of particular concern is the number of hate crimes committed against Hispanics and those perceived to be immigrants has increased each of the past 4 years for which FBI data is available. And hate crimes committed against individuals because of their sexual orientation has increased to its highest level in 5 years. So this is the backdrop against which I think this panel discussion is going to take place, which seems to want to situate the experience of minorities, blacks in the military as being significantly different from the experience of the same groups in American society, in civilian society, I should say. So I managed to find a paper written by Rhonda Evans. She did some postdoctoral work at the University of California at Berkeley, and she did a paper called A History of the Service of Ethnic Minorities in the U.S. Armed Forces. In that paper, she discusses the persistent discrimination starting off with, of course, the Revolutionary War, and then the Civil War in the United States, the First World War, the Second World War, the Korean War, in which there was systematic discrimination against people from minority groups in the military. So it will be interesting to see what this panel has to say about how that's evolved, what persists today, what does not persist. And so here's how I'd like to frame this discussion, if I might. As we, and this was of course with the help of the organizers of this conference, so it's not entirely my framing, but here we go. So as we celebrate Black History Month, it's hard to understand how these kinds of discrimination could still, the ones I referred to in these articles that we talked about, could still exist today. We continue to ask ourselves, how can the scourge of racism be eliminated from our society? It's a perennial question that we ask. As part of the Bateman team's Bet on Vets campaign in Black History Month, the idea of this panel came about to examine how the military has dealt with and continues to deal with the question of race. Some assert that vets see green, meaning that military servicemen and women see their fellow comrades as people, not black or white or Asian or Hispanic. But to what extent is this true? Where is race still an issue in the military, and where is it not? What forms of discrimination still persist in the military, and how can they be attenuated? If the military has to some extent succeeded in downplaying the importance of race, how can this success be rolled over into our everyday society? So those are the kinds of questions we'll be wanting you to address today. And tonight's discussion is titled, I retitled this discussion. It was titled Camaraderie is Colorblind. I mean, that would not pass academic muster. So we retitled it Is Camaraderie Colorblind? And the panelists have served, I'm going to introduce the panelists now, have served or are serving our country in the United States military. I made some notes here. If I misrepresent you, I think it'd be easier if I just read off your name cards, but because that's probably more accurate than I do here. So I'm going to just go in order as I can see them here. So starting on my left, General David Kratzer, who's Vice President of Student Affairs, University of Florida. Then we have, and if you could just sort of, well, you'll know we're left to right, so we don't have to do anything. And then there's Command Sergeant Major Leon Caffey, is that right? Yes. Pronounce it correctly. Florida Ambassador and U.S. Army Reserve Officer, correct? No, you just Army Reserve, period, period, thank you. Lieutenant Colonel Julia Wilson, I can barely see that from here as of my old age, my eyes, but it says Army servicewoman of 20 years, graduate student in the health and education and behavioral sciences. And I met you previously, I had the pleasure of having you briefly in one of my classes as a PhD student. Javan Brown, Army National Guardsman, Family, Youth, and Community Sciences major here at the University of Florida, I assume also. Yes. Is that correct? Very. Travis Harvey, who we share some intimacy a bit prior to starting. Marine veteran, executive director of Whole Courses Helping People.
There's a correction there, it's Army veteran.
Army veteran, thank you.
I did, if I had to do it all over again.
Thank you for that correction. And then finally, Cornelius Clayton Jr., Vietnam veteran and photographer for the Samuel Proctor Oral History Project. So welcome all of you to the panel. And they're here to share with us their experiences. And I hope this, my intention in being your moderator is to assist you to the degree that I can in having a candid discussion about these issues. I don't think we were here to do, well, you may have thought you were here for some other reason, but I'm here to have a candid discussion about these issues. And we thank you for joining us and look forward to everyone's engagement, and I include you in the audience in this discussion. So I've been given some questions to ask you, but I don't think I'll limit myself to these questions, but we can start off by maybe going around briefly around the table with a first question, which would be, if you could, if this can be brief, tell us about your military service. I don't know how that could be very briefly responded to. But I think a good place to start is, how is it that your military service brought you to Gainesville? Why don't we try that? And I'll go in reverse order.
Well, I just live about 20 miles out of Gainesville.
Yes. So that's, and the connection, what is the connection with your military service in Gainesville?
Well, my military service was out of state and in Vietnam.
Uh-huh, okay.
I don't quite understand what you asked.
Well, I was asking, how is it that your military service brought you to Gainesville? So were you from Gainesville, or Melrose then went to Vietnam and then came back? Okay, that's what I was trying to get at. Okay. Right, very good. And I'm curious, how long were you in Vietnam?
2 years. I was drafted, 1966, 69. Got wounded over there November 11, 1967. So I was in there a very short time.
Okay. And decided to come back to Gainesville.
I was glad to come back.
I know.
I only lasted 6.5 months over there.
Oh, before I never come back to. I know some people never come back. That's why.
Yeah, I know. My friend.
Yes, sir.
I grew up in Southwest New York. I joined the Air Force out of that. I wanted to be pararescue, which is a high-end paramedic special forces team. I didn't quite make that, so I got out of the Air Force and joined the Army. From there, I was wounded in Iraq in 2003, and I came back, and I was all through Central Florida. I went back to New York for a couple of years, and when I came back here, the reason we chose Gainesville is one of our daughters was interested in going to school here. So we and my daughter lives about an hour south of us, so it made it convenient for us to put one through school here and wait to see if the other one wants to go through school here. So we're really excited to be here.
Welcome.
Well, myself, I was born and raised in Jamaica, migrated to Miami, and after deploying and everything else and I came back, I just wanted to start school. But for some reason, to start school in February, I'd have to wait till the summer. That's what everyone said. I was impatient. I didn't want to go to online schooling. And Santa Fe College had this thing called Spring League. Hence, here I am in Gainesville. Go get them, by the way.
You got all the bases covered, right?
Hi, I'm actually an active duty soldier. I'm here on the Army Advanced Civil Schooling Program with the future assignment at West Point to be an academy professor. I was here about 10 years ago under a similar program, and I feel extremely blessed to be here because I could be many places, but I'm here. And so I'm in my second year, have one more year. The Army has a very strict timeline. And then after this, I'll be going to do some operational job for a year or two before I actually get to West Point, to re-green, as they call it. But
Re-green?
re-green, to get back into the mix of things, most likely at a division or a deployment again. So I've been in over 20 years. I've been deployed 3 times. I'm married. I have 3 children. I have 2 children that are officers as well. They're second lieutenants and first lieutenant. So little family tradition in that. So,
You started when you were 4 years old?
basically, I can tell you a story there too. My dad was in the Army for 26 years, so this culture has been a part of my life since I was born. I was born in Savannah, Tuttle Army Hospital, moved around my entire life. There was only a very short stint of civilian life, and what I call with the civilian population was when my father got out, and then I soon after went to school for a little bit and joined the Army right away. I've been more comfortable and more around the military environment than I have the civilian environment. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Yes, sir.
I moved here from Montgomery, Alabama in 1965. Finished high school at Lincoln High School, which is a segregated school system in 1965. Got drafted with the Vietnam for a year as a combat infantry soldier. Returned from Vietnam in 1970. Went to school on the GI Bill, continued to stay with the Army Reserve. Went to work in law enforcement, Watson County Sheriff's Office. Maintaining my association and membership with the United States Army Reserve Command. This gentleman and I have been battle buddies for many years. We deployed to Iraq together in 2002, 2003, where he commanded 43,500 soldiers.
Wow.
Upon returning from Iraq, I served, he was the commander of a unit in New Orleans, Louisiana. I actually retired in 2006, was asked to come back on active duty as a command sergeant major for 205,000 soldiers in 50 states, 5 territories, and 40 countries around the world. My last duty assignment was at the Pentagon for 3.5 years, and I traveled extensively. I've met with the Armed Service Committee, both in the House and in the Senate, and I've met repeatedly with the Black Caucus, addressing minorities in the military academies, and we'll discuss some later. I retired from active duty January 22nd, 2010, and moved back to Gainesville. My wife and I, we've been here ever since.
Thank you very much.
So this is my best friend. Don't tell my wife. And we've been many places together, so this is an interesting topic, I think, and maybe we can, and when you're a commander, it's not that simple. It's a command team, and the command team is the command sergeant major and the commander. So, and it's funny, you think as a general officer you get to do all these things. You don't get to do a lot of things, but you get to do one thing for sure, and that is you get to pick your command sergeant major from whoever is out there. So this was a very intentional thing. So we actually made this pledge to each other a long time ago that if we ever went to war, we'd go together, and we did. I had just come back from Afghanistan after 9/11. I found myself in Egypt for a month and a half, about 9 days after that event. Came back packing stuff, went to Fort McPherson in Georgia, and then from there Kuwait, and then entered into Afghanistan in December of 2001. Most of my team there was Special Forces. There were not very many of us at that moment in time in 2001, 2002. I was fortunate to be named the Chief of Military Cooperation with the United States Embassy, Kabul, at that time. Great affiliation for the Marines, Randall, because they protected us very well, and there weren't very many of them there. So from there, I came out for several months, was fortunate to get promoted, received my second star, and was named as commander of this unit that was going to deploy, and that's when I called Leon, and we gathered the team and went. So there's a lot of things we could talk about, but I'm sure we need to get to what is on your agenda.
I think we could start with, since the two of you have been in the military for how many years together?
Combined 152.
Yeah. I have 39.
And I had 34.
All right, well, that's a good starting place, I think. And how many years were you in?
10 years.
10. And you? 2?
7.
21. Very good.
My number is not that impressive.
That's a baby.
About 8 years and 3 months. But
Great.
who's counting, right?
So we have a pretty wide spread. It looks like from 2 to 39. So I think it might be a question, the second question might be apropos for a discussion. So what was the initial environment when you started in the military? I'll take volunteers on that.
Ratio environment,
Yes.
can you
Yeah, more fun.
define it?
Well, let's see. So, for example, when someone comes to, I came to the University of Florida back in 1989, right? And the stories that were going around then were that this was a campus that was hostile to the local African-American community. In fact, most of them didn't go to the University of Florida. They went to Florida A&M was the university of choice. So that gives you an idea. So I'm trying to get you to give me a picture of what it might have been when you started out in the military. What did it look like to you? What did you encounter when you came into that situation? And again, I'm open to anyone starting off this conversation, but I can keep on if you want me to. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to volunteer Leon because he was. No, I'll tell you why, and then I'll. But what year were you drafted?
1970.
So you and Cornelius might have some similar time frame there. Drafted in 1970, they wrote an article about this guy when he finally retired in 2010. He was the longest serving draftee in the United States Army.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I would say that would be a good place to begin.
This is not unusual.
I might have to decouple you to it.
No, we enjoy it.
He'll get me back.
Yeah. I was drafted and reported to Fort Jackson, South Carolina for basic training. For my arrival at Fort Jackson, I encountered a lot of people who looked like me. That was in specifically combat MOSs, 11 Bravo.
I'm sorry, the jargon, MOS.
Okay. That's a skill set.
Your job description.
Military is broken down into 3 skill sets: combat service, and combat service support. The combat MOSs are people who actually do the ground fight. And once you get drafted, you don't have a choice where you're placed. And so when I reported to Fort Jackson, South Carolina in April the 2nd, 1970, I encountered a lot of people who looked like me within that combat MOS. And that was a 99% chance you was going to Vietnam. We didn't have the options going to Canada or going to other places or being enrolled in college and getting a deferment. So the draft proportionally drafted a lot of African Americans into combat MOSs, and 99% of those combat soldiers were shipped to Vietnam. In contrast to what we have today, there are very few blacks in the combat MOS arena. Most of them are in the combat service and the combat service support arena. And that has adverse effects on them as well. And so the makeup of the combat MOS is primarily kids from Midwestern states. and those kids are predominantly white. Had the opportunity to go to a graduation Marine Corps base at Parris Island. And looking through the graduating class, you can actually pick out the African-American soldiers, African-American Marines that had volunteered. Now, we got all volunteer military.
Someone else want to speak to how it was then when you started it and how it is now?
I agree with Commander Sergeant Major. Then versus now. When I got in, it was predominantly white. Special Forces specifically is predominantly white. You don't see very many blacks or Asians or Spanish descent.
Why is that?
You know, I know, man, I really can't answer that question. I know most Special Forces have a high water training, and it's very aggressive. And most ethnic groups don't have a swimming background, so I would say part of it has to do with that. I don't know, I can't answer it. But when I transitioned out of the Air Force and went into the Army, it was still a significant white environment, and but you didn't, you didn't treat it that way, or at least I didn't. I mean, you still saw some things, I guess, early on compared to in my last few years as going to Iraq that may have been questionable. But usually it's because the individual, whether white, black, or otherwise, had a negative attitude about things, and they were treated poorly.
My experience, I was enlisted before I became an officer, and so when I came in the early 90s, they were beginning to mix male and female trainees. It was strictly male or strictly female, and so they were integrating the gender issue too at the same time. And what I remember is you had a mixture of black, Hispanic, and Asian, and even white. You had a mixture of that in just about every platoon that I can remember back. I remember there was Bravo 228. I still remember mine. But you never forget your drill sergeants, Ruiz and Hayes. Sergeant Glad, Drill Sergeant Ruiz, and you never forget your unit, and some of the folks that you went to basic training with. As I moved on from becoming an enlisted soldier and being in a combat service support unit, I would agree with Sergeant Major that, Command Sergeant Major though, that you predominantly saw Hispanics and blacks in the combat service support and predominantly whites in the warfighter type units. And I can recall reading an article about why was this happening in the Midwest? I would talk to some of the guys like, hey, why do you want to go infantry, or why don't you want to do this? And he's like, I left the city because I was getting shot at. Why would I want to shoot at somebody? And I'm like, well, you're in the Army, right? That's kind of what you do. It doesn't matter what you're going to do. Whereas I would ask a counterpart, infantry guy or something, and he'd say, I like to hunt. So I think it was a matter, too, of a preference of what your background, we always talk about those variables, socioeconomic background, where you lived, location, environment where you lived, your culture, your skill set, things of that nature. So I think that in ways that has impacted who selects where they want to go. Because again, you have to understand, when you come in the Army, you're going to take a test, an ASVAB. It's a volunteer Army now. It has been for a while. And so based on your test score determines what kind of jobs that you're going to get. And when I came in, I got a really highly skilled job. I did well on my ASVAB.
What was the job that you got?
I was an information systems operator, and I worked at Forces Command. That was my first assignment. I worked in WMIX downstairs. And my job was to make sure all the communication lines were up. It was a 24/7 operation. You ever seen War Games? Anybody ever seen War Games? mean, just think of the Forces Command, that's, you know, they're constantly wargaming and ready to, you know, send orders for units to go and fight the wars and the battles, whatever's going on in the world, it needs to be done. So when I was there, I can tell you that it was a mixture of female, it was a mixture of male, it was a mixture of black and white, in a very technical job. And then once I transited from there to being an officer, same thing. What I saw challenging more, or the differences, was in gender, not so much, you know, race. It was more gender. I was always one of, and I have served, even though I'm a combat service sport, I have served the Special Forces. I've been assigned to the Special Forces group. I've been embedded in some units. And, you know, when they look at, when you come into a unit, I don't think the color isn't the issue. The color, the things they're gonna look at is, how do you look in that uniform? Are you fit? Do you have military bearing? You know, can you keep up either workload, whatever we're doing? The first time you go to a unit, you're in your PTs and you're showing up for PT. So can you hang? And those seem to be the things that discriminate, rather than even whether you're a female or whether you're black or white or some other thing. So that's kind of my experience.
I'd like to hear from Mr. Clayton and from Mr. Brown.
Okay, well.
This is, again, the original question. What was it like coming
I didn't really have experience with the race problem. I got drafted in, my basic was in Fort Gordon, Georgia. And so that's like 6 weeks of training. And everybody was like one big happy family. Okay, I came home, we had like a couple of weeks home, then I went to advanced training up in Carolina. And it was the same way there. That was in 68. Yeah, I had no problem there. Even when I went to Vietnam, I mean, I was only there for 6.5 months. But I didn't feel, we had no issues among anybody. And as I told one of the people there, asked me about coming, I say, we were just like one big happy family. And everybody needed everybody. And even when we got into a combat situation, nobody was denied, or, you know, was acting like they didn't want to defend nobody, because they were like shoulder to shoulder, whatever, you know. So I didn't have those kind of problems.
Yeah, very good.
And
You know, I guess, let me switch the question, because there have been not more than one highly successful films that have portrayed the military as being an environment in which it's very much separate but equal, especially in the World War II, World War I. So I'm just, you know, I'm just a moderator for this panel, but it seems to me that there have been some reports of friction within the military. In fact, I remember doing with the sociologists here at the University of Florida, we went and did some facilitation for an officers group in the military between the officers in the military, there was some racial friction. So I don't think I'm making all of this up. But I would like to know if I hear you saying that no, these things don't exist. Some of you saying I never encountered it. I hear others of you saying that you did encounter it. So I just want to get this out on the table. Where did it show up for you, and in what way, and you know that, so we can get it out front before we go into other questions.
The military is a microcosm of society as a whole.
Well,
And so the ills you have in society, you have the same ills in the military. You can turn a deaf ear to it, but it's very prevalent. You look at exceptions to the military academies. I remember having a conversation with the chairman of the Black Caucus in Washington, D.C., and they had approached Secretary Rumsfeld about why we didn't have more African-American general officers. And his reply is, well, something we need to take a look at. But in the trends are that they're, because if you go to the military academies and you're in some MOSs, back to that combat arm, let me sum it this way. There are 3 African-American 4-star generals in the Army today, active duty. The commander of Central Command, Lloyd Austin. The commander of Pacific Command, who served with us in the desert, Brooks. And the commander of Army Material Command in Huntsville, Alabama, is a 4-star. There are 1 female 4-star in the Navy. There are 1 3-star African American in the Marine Corps. And there's 2 3-star African Americans in the Air Force. When you look at the totality of those general officers and you see the difference, the drastic fall off of why there aren't more African American general officers. And the reason why, because they're not being accepted into the military academies. So it's prevalent. Just something General Cresser has said about a general officer has the right to select his command sergeant major. There are general officers who do not select African Americans or Hispanic command sergeant major. And I have dealt with that being the commander of the entire Army Reserve Command on a consistent basis. Some of it is race-based, some of it is that we seem to have the same goals and objectives in mind. So, if you look at it from a gender perspective, there are certain general officers will not accept a female command sergeant major. All branches of the service. And so, there is gender bias and it's also race bias. Does it raises that feeling of that community? In combat in Vietnam, a lot of black soldiers refused to go in the jungle and fight. The division commander locked them all up, which was in his right to do. That's clear, and they felt they were being discriminated against. But you don't do that in a combat environment.
Lock them all up?
Yes, put them in jail.
The rationale being?
That they disobeyed the direct order. To a certain degree, could have shot them.
Okay. Let me, I'm gonna give each one of the panelists a chance to participate, and then we'll pursue this a little further. Because now I'm intrigued. What did you say about your experience?
I was gonna say, to be honest, I think Command Sergeant Major just leaned on it at, I guess, if you will, at a macro level. I'm gonna just come down a little bit lower where I came in. I joined in Miami, and if you will, Miami, you can't call it a melting pot because the temperature, I think it's still hot. You have to melt. At some point, you just like, just vaporize. Miami is like that, like everyone is there. It's like all type of races, you just don't care. What you really discriminate on is the food, like how does this taste? Because, and to be honest, I went to a high school where the white students were the minority. So it was that kind of a dynamic, that demographic where I was in Miami. So when I joined, in a unit, just like Yazba mentioned earlier, I scored pretty high, and I could have been an intelligence analyst, which I guess very, very, if you will, revered line to go down. But for me to travel there in the Guard, I'd have to go up to Orlando or some further region to get to that unit. But I'm in Miami. No, I'm not going to do that 3 hours just because. So realistically, what I had where I was I have a combat support unit, and I had combat units, infantry. And for one, I could also do artillery and try to get attached to an infantry unit or get sent somewhere to Tampa or something. Big trucks, I think I'd rather go drive those things. It's beautiful, I love it. And as such, I was around a diverse group of people. Majority, black, white, Hispanic, was just across the board. It was a mix. When I went to basic training, seeing that I'm a part of a infantry brigade, I went to Fort Benning, Georgia. They discriminate, not by race, by gender. no females allowed. I think they since changed that, but at that point, strictly males. And the dynamic there was never, what's your race? It's, what's your PT score? Can you perform? And if you can, that's when you get pushed by the wayside, and that's when you get treated differently. If you're not able to do your job or meet the standard or excel or motivate me to do better, then why would I want to be around you? You're just a waste. So let me go around that other guy that's pushing himself so we can push each other. So that was more my experience. I will, however, say this. AIT, Advanced Individual Training, was a little bit different. I encountered this one individual, and I'll tell you, he's my champion story. Very good buddy of mine. He's from, I can never say the city in Kentucky. I call it backwoods Kentucky. I apologize. No, I'm not going to the gym today. He's from what I'll call backwoods Kentucky, just because I can never say the word. And he said to me, when I'm in the room once listening to country music and he's trying to do his thing, it was his music playing. And I guess he looked at me funny, turned it up. Lo and behold, I like Taylor Swift too. So here it goes. You'll be surprised what people like. So I'm singing all these country songs and he just stopped, turned it off and said, wait, I have a question. What does a black Jamaican know about country? And for some people, like, this is insensitive. What's going on? I'm like, what do you mean? But for him, he's never met someone who's Jamaican. There's only one black kid in his city, for reasons we won't discuss, as he explained to me. And that's where he came from. So now he's seeing in everything that he knows about the other race based on his experiences is actually channeled and taught to him by the community that he's from. So his questions and the way he asked his questions, I will tell you, in other places would have got him punched in the face, some broken jaw or something, because he was just completely out of line. But it was just a natural curiosity. And this individual went from, and we was in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri for 9 weeks. I wish it was sooner, but like short, but it was about 9 weeks. And from the time we started to the time we ended, his entire perspective, and he shared something at the end. He said, did you know, I'm in the KKK? I was like, wait, hold up, stop, freeze, what do you mean? And he's like, yeah, it's like a thing, it's not like we don't wear hoods, we just sit in the woods and we crack jokes and all kinds of stuff. I'm like, okay, all right. That offer to go hunting, I'm not taking it. But to be honest, at the end of that entire experience, he learned something, and for him, what he explained to me was, what I see and what I know is not what I've come to know. His experience, which was taught to him by his community, is not now what he's experienced with me and other black and Hispanics, if you will, that he now met in Missouri. And it was the Army that exposed him to these different races, these different experiences, and he actually was like, he felt guilty about, I guess, his actions before and what he believed and the things he used to say. And at some point, and I think this is what might make a lot of difference, is how are we towards people who are ignorant and don't know that they're ignorant? Because that's the malady. If you can stop and understand that, okay, he didn't know, now he do. Now he does, and he's sharing that with you, like, okay. And he goes, I had to be at a point where I can say, okay, dude, those things aren't cool, but okay, and we can talk through it like people and move past it. And he still called me up every so often and go, what's going on, my Jamaican man, in his Jamaican accent, to this day.
Okay, so I think we've established, I'm not going to ask you the same question, I have a different question for you. But I think we've established that there are a variety of ways in which people entered into the military and a variety of experiences that they have within the military. And this speaks to, and you've also mentioned something that Professor Evans has spoken about, is that the experience of the military just seems to have some kind of homogenizing effect, in which people come in and they are brought from wherever they've come from into some kind of alignment because of either the job that they have to do or how they perform on a test or the unit that they're assigned to. So I'd like to transition the question, General Kratzer, to if you could talk a little bit about how it is or what structures exist within the military that tend to have this homogenizing effect.
Okay. It'll be interesting when we get to the question and answer part, and my fellow veterans out there chime in on it. We each have a different hand on the elephant, and it'd be interesting to hear your perspective as well. But I would say a couple things. First of all, an aspect that we haven't talked about. So, especially when you're talking about overtime, and I guess I went to Fort Benning, my initial training in 1968, and came back and finished college before I went in. So I guess a number of us have been around since the Vietnam era, and we've seen all these different iterations. I think the biggest difference and the biggest impact that really has bearing on what we're talking about is the fact that this is an all-volunteer military. So it's a different thing when you're taken from your environment and you're told you have to go, and you may not have gotten your mind ready to do this, you don't want to do this, you're not prepared to do it. And you end up being in a situation, I think, that we inherited in Vietnam, and we saw played out in real life. It was hard. Here was a war that was hard to understand. Why were we there? And a lot of questions about it, even during when people were there. And there's not much time to be philosophical during the war. So yeah, you can get shot for not doing your job. And it doesn't matter what color you are. And so to force that even compounded, I think, all the other problems that existed when people came in. I think now, and one of the things I think current war vets will tell you that they experienced was, they signed up to go. And a lot of people signed up after 2001, and I know as working here at the University of Florida, consistently I would have people come in, close the door and say, can you help me talk to my parents? I'm getting ready to graduate, but I think I owe something, I want to do this. So I think there was a different feeling, and if you take a look at the current war, just to go off your question, it's so much different. It's so much different. Look, here's somebody who's been in 21 years, already been deployed, and coming back in and staying in. And how many of you had more than one deployment? Okay, see, that's different. There wasn't an end. There wasn't an end in the parade of the thing. You didn't do your time. It's like, before I left in 2006, I started giving general's coins to people who had served and returned. And then we would have a formation, and I'd have, pretty soon, I had to say, I'm on the coins, how many people have been twice? And then it was 3 times. And the last one I did, how many people have been more than 3 times? And I had people who had already deployed 5 times. And I got it. I left in 2006, when most of you were coming up, or after that. So it's really a different commitment. When you join a team, you very much join a team. And one of the ways, and I don't have all the answers for that, but you talked about how does this thing happen. So you went to Fort Stewart. Is that your initial?
Fort Jackson.
Fort Jackson. So I got to go to Fort Jackson and talk to the colonel that is in charge of the entire basic training program, and it's one of the major induction centers in the country for the Army right now. And this was about 5 years ago. And they just gave me transportation, and he just said, you can go wherever you want to, and didn't send anybody with me, except the driver. And I could show up at any point in basic training, and there are groups going through different phases of basic training, so you get to kind of see it all if you kind of cut across it. I was amazed at what I saw, because the old thing that I inherited in 1968, I think was left over from 1955, so it was pretty rough. Nobody slept, and it was intentionally put you under stress and to test you in that way. The Army really had changed, and when I came back, I grabbed that colonel and I said, wait a minute, explain to me what I just saw. And he started a big grin on his face. And I said, this isn't like when I went through. What happened? And he said, the light bulb went on. He said, we only have people for about 8.5 weeks. And he said, we used to spend the first 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks breaking people down, and then we would build them up. He said, the world is too complex. We start building people up from day one. And he said the whole thing is, people going through basic training today actually I went to see this. They were actually laying down and giving each other an IV. They were actually drawing blood from each other, and it's like, there wasn't a lot of training there. It's like you and I, okay, are you gonna lay down first and I'm gonna poke you? We get to be friends. So, and then there's a whole lot more about technology and electronics and communication. And so the basic soldier on the ground, the basic Marine on the ground has got to know so much more right now. There isn't time for all that. And the other thing they did that really changed the culture, so some of you have been out for a while, nothing happens that the drill sergeant doesn't do first. So if this is a wall and there's 3 of us and we have to figure out how to get over that wall, we have to get all 3 of us over the wall. Well, the drill sergeants do it first to prove it can be done. And then you do it. And then at the end of the day, you realize the drill sergeant's done everything, and they've done everything maybe 3 times while you've done it once. It's quite a profession. Great respect. So I think that changes. It really changes things in how you start to build teams. But that's one perspective I've got.
So would you, there's one of the things that the Commander Kathy mentioned was that there was some, in terms of ascendance through the ranks, which is of course the problem we face also in civilian society, that there's an underrepresentation of people of color, I would think in general, from what I've been able to read. So how does this transformation that's you say is taking place in how soldiers are trained, how does that jive, if you would, with the fact that in the upper echelons in the military we still have a very biased representation?
I wish I had the answer to all that. It's something that you and I talk about a lot. But I think you have to have a personal commitment, and if you're a leader, you have a responsibility. And so when he and I got to New Orleans, it didn't take us very long. We had a meeting after hours one night. He said, "Let's fix this." And it's interesting. So when you come in as a new commander, as a new command team, that unit's been there for 100 years. You're going to be there for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. So you have to watch out for the institutional part of it, which is just going to wait you out if people think you can do that. So we decided that we were going to make it so that people didn't think they could wait that long, and I think we did.
Yes.
You want to elaborate on that?
I'm curious.
It's not a bad thing to fire someone.
To
Fire.
Fire. Yeah. Because there are people, I use the cliche that people have been promoted to a high level of incompetence. And they've been able to survive and being ineffective, regardless of what ethnicity they may be. So we had to fire some people. And we reached down and we elevated those who wasn't based on gender or ethnicity, was based on their ability to perform at that level. So firing people is not a bad thing. We used to use the norm that our soldiers are entitled to the best leadership we can provide for them. And that's the premise of what our command team was about. And one thing about a general officer, he listened to me and he would take my opinion. I would go to the general and say, "Sir, you got a couple of officers over there. It's dumb as a box of rocks. And they can't perform at the level you expect them to perform." And not everyone is willing to do that. I think that we are at a fast pace, and these kids are so intelligent and so bright and doing things that when I got drafted, never been heard of before. We got some kids, and I call them kids, 18 and 19 years of age, that's in the military intelligence field, that worked at NAS, the White House, in a think tank in Texas, that will do some things that will blow your mind. We have 18 and 19-year kids that protected us from Scud batteries, was a shot at us by Saddam Hussein. Patriot batteries. A young female captain, 25 years of age. And all her subordinates, 18 and 19 years of age. That level of intelligence wasn't heard of when I came into the military. And it's not, I think the biggest growth in the military is parity with females. Giving female soldiers an opportunity to perform not based on their gender, but based on their intelligence and their professionalism and their desire to do the job.
Has that been your experience with them?
Yeah, yes, it has. It's been my experience. My last deployment, I took a command downrange because there was a command that was being moved. I was actually pulled out of IOE early at Fort Leavenworth and went downrange, and we had a new sergeant major, we had a new first sergeant. Didn't know, never worked with these NCOs before, and but we had a mission. I had 3 AORs in Afghanistan. I had 10 detachments, and I was responsible for almost $1 billion in disbursements and contracts. And we had over about 235 frontline soldiers. And they were a genre. They were a mixture of National Guard, Reserve, and active duty, which in itself is it's huge because you have different skill sets. You have different cultures embedded in those units. And Sergeant Major Cosby, he's up in Fort Bragg right now. We built a camaraderie because it was based on taking care of soldiers and taking care of the mission. You know, that's what I get paid to do: take care of soldiers, take care of training, take care of equipment to get the mission done, and bring soldiers, bring them back home alive. And although I was a combat service support, we were constantly on battlefield rotation. We were constantly being shot at. We were constantly, we traveled by land, we traveled by air. Our teams would go out and extend to the forward operating bases as well as the combat operating bases. I had soldiers everywhere on that battlefield, that footprint. And responsible for not only the money, but responsible for their well-being. And when I think about this color blindness, you know, when you're in that mix, when you're there, it doesn't matter whether you're a female, whether you're a male, whether you're black, Asian, Hispanic. It goes back to all the things we've been saying. Do your mission, you know, do your duty, and remember your warrior ethos. I think that was mentioned earlier. How does this all come together? How does this all come together? It comes together through our warrior ethos, and those warrior ethos are our Army values. We're taught that from day one. Whether you're an officer, whether you're enlisted, I still have my Army values tag from day one when I came in the Army. It still hangs on my, my dog tags, my identification tags. And it goes by our soldier creed. You know, I will always place, the mission first. I would never accept defeat. I would never quit. I would never leave fallen comrades. I mean, that's our creed. That's what we believe in. Nothing in there says you're black, you're white, you're woman,
Well, let me interrogate that, because, see, one of the things that I'm not in the military, so I talk about civilian society, and we make a comparison, and you can speak to that. But one of the things that we do notice in civilian society is that there is perception of male privilege, there is a perception of white privilege, and it would seem that these would carry over into the military also, given that people in the military come from civilian society. So I guess my question has to do with, to what extent do you see the attitudes of white privilege and male privilege arise in the military? And I was hoping you would raise your hand, because I went into, you guys are a little on the younger end of the spectrum here, so.
It's the way it is. It's all to speak and listen to hang out.
Just hang out,
Told
and
what
wait.
to do.
But to address your question, and you talk about this privilege, right? To be quite honest with you, privilege is privilege wherever you go. It's going to happen, right? You have what we consider the good old boy club. If you're in it, you get a pat on the back, and you might get 2 steps advance versus the other person. It happens wherever you go, and I won't be naive to sit here or anyone's going to tell you it doesn't happen in the military, because it does. Now, to what extent, it might be a little bit different. The colonel just hit on something which I think is the fundamental difference between civilians and service members, period. It's, in civilian life, every single person is from a different family. They have different values, different beliefs, your religion, everything else in the world that matters to you. The bottom line is, as a soldier, your religion, your creed, your family values, and all that other stuff, it doesn't matter, because what matters now is, now we all identify the same values. Now we all identify to the same creed. Now we all fight to the same ethos. So when you have people that's retrained and now we all think we're coming from the same perspective, now we're all able to work together. If you sit in this room, and I've done a few leadership trainings, and every single person in this room right now, try to make a team. You're going to bump heads, right? You're going to go through the storm and Norman performing that stage to get there, to actually be able to do something. Guess what? We went through it. It's called basic training. And regardless of who it is, where they are, where they come from, they have some kind of value to it. Now, I'm going to take a step back and go a little bit broader. Now, this inner service where we make fun, Marine Corps, Air Force, it's this teasing back and forth. But I guarantee you one thing. Make the mistake and step to a brother or sister in the combat arms or in the service. Because at that point, it doesn't matter what the color of the uniform, be it blue or a fake camouflage, we might jokingly say. Now we all wear the same flag. Now that's a bigger issue. See, so now when you redefine your values, when you redefine the perspectives and the beliefs that you come from, and why we're here, regardless of the politics, God bless the United States of America, now you change the perspective in which we all relate to each other. So I think that might actually, if you will, have more weight versus the privilege. Even though I will tell you, privilege does exist wherever you go. But coming from a unified perspective might be the bigger difference, the greater difference, than in service members versus civilians.
Can you speak to this?
Yeah, to a degree, because I got some things that'll probably throw it for a loop a little bit. I just have one question: is what year did you go to that basic training and see it was different from when you went through it?
68 was my first trip,
And then
and
you
then,
went
and then going back was probably maybe 2009.
All right, so after I went to basic training, so it was still a tear-down system then. You'll never see young men cry any faster that haven't been yelled at in their entire lives than when you show up to a room where there's 100 of you sleeping in bunk beds together and being told to just open your locker, because the sergeant's there. And they're doing that where they're building them up from day one. They're putting our military further ahead already, and I'm really glad to hear that. But it's funny to a degree, because I was one of those guys that cried, and I got yelled at all the time. There's this training. I'm trying to get my locker open. But what really got me with what you stated, sir, is it really comes down to tradition, and what traditions you grow up in. The military has its tradition, and its traditions are taken from Britain and how their military ran. And those traditions were taken back from how the Middle Ages were developed and how they fought. And when you're talking about a routine that is for hundreds and hundreds of years, predominantly white, you're going to have those issues for a very, very long time until somebody steps up and says, we're not going to do it anymore. And I commend you, gentlemen. I thank you for that, because I grew up in Southwest New York. That's not New York City, but it's, Great Lakes, Erie, right area. I went to school with blacks and Hispanics and Asians, and it was really different then. And I come down here and I got, less, what I would consider less educated or less mature people throwing out racial bias left and right in a career field, and it's very interesting. But you're talking about breaking down institution, and that institution is predominantly white, hundreds of years back, and it's nobody's fault. You know, in this day and age, it's nobody's fault.
Well, so that allows us to make a transition here. So, you know, I think we're hearing, or what I'm hearing, is that you're maintaining, advocating that there is a system within the military that is effective in reducing the effects of our racial prejudices, our class prejudices to a certain extent, and perhaps even our gender biases. And so the question that I think your audience would like to know, and I'd like to have an answer to, and perhaps I would too, is to what extent do you think any of the practices or any of the policies that are used in the military can be transferred into civilian society?
I got a question for you, sir.
That takes me off the hook.
And I think it's a question that we all can stop and think about just for a second.
Sure.
And it goes back to a part, I guess, or democracy where people can act and feel and think and be whatever they want to do and stuff like that. Because in the military, I just share this with you. There's a certain level of, actually, no, it just is what it is. There's rules, right? And then there's laws and different governments in which we follow and we abide by. When we took an oath, right, we're now punishable under the UCMJ, and this different set of laws, this added set of laws, which is, you know, doctrinalize how we perform, how we interact, and things that we will not do. And it establishes, and this is a key word I want you to identify, standards. It establishes standards to who we will be as service members. Not you as a black man, a white man, a woman, a male, not that, but as a soldier, wearing this uniform, how you will act, how you will conduct yourself. That's a little bit different versus when you look at a civilian who, I can just do whatever I want. And I think that also has a little bit more basis as to what makes a soldier or a service member, if you will, across the branches, different from a civilian. And it's because we have that extra, not say rules or laws, but we have that added value to us that we say, okay, you know what? We represent something greater than ourselves. Right? And it's that greater than self which dictates a lot of the things we do and how we act. Or naturally how I would react when I was 18, 19, before I was in the service, versus, okay, let me take a step back, all right? This now affects not just me, but my buddies to my left and right. How would that look to my unit? You know, I want to be that guy. We all talk about that guy, you know. So that is, do you think as civilians you would be ready to have such an added set of responsibility to you as civilians? And if you as an individual accept that, then you're a part of the change that's going to happen. But for those who don't, how do you make them?
Is that a question to me or to the audience? Or?
However you like it, sir.
Well, I want to come back to your answers to this, but I'll give you this. In the professions, for example, in journalism, I'm in the College of Journalism and Communications, and in public relations, in advertising, in the professions, in medicine, for that matter, in law. Our students are taught also a set of guidelines for behavior and principles of behavior. Usually they're ethical guidelines for behavior, and expected to abide by them. So it's not a free-for-all, the way you put it, where anyone can do anything that they want. You're expected to conform to certain norms of behavior also. Now, I think the question that I was trying to get at if that answers your question. So there are some ways in which we attempt to instill in people who are going in through an educational process some common norms of behavior and standards that they should adapt themselves to in order not just to be successful, but in order to avoid harming other people, or at least minimizing their harm. The question, though, that I was trying to frame for you is, are there some practices that could be, in your views, could be transferred to those of us who are in civilian life, or in American civilian life, to put it more generally, that you think might be valuable in making for a more just and a more meritocratic society? So that's the question. I'll say one more thing to help you as you think about your response. You know, we do have, we had a period in this society, and some people say we still have it, of social engineering. So, you know, when we, for example, people aren't ready to go to war, we have an advertising system that prepares people for accepting that we have to go to war in Iraq or Vietnam or wherever we're having an intervention at the time. So there is a way of getting people to adopt new behaviors. We have that, I think we perfected the mechanism for doing that. The question is, what parts of the military experience do you think could be inculcated, if you would, or transferred, or emphasized in civilian society and educational institutions, perhaps even at the primary school level, if you would, that would be helpful in eradicating this problem that we're talking about today, which is the lack of a colorblind society?
I can answer that question.
Take a shot at it.
Not takers, good.
And I'm a military veteran, so
There we go.
it's simple. I think it's the unifying core principles that the Army has. I think LTC Julia hit the nail on the head when she said, you know, loyalty, honesty, service. That's it. Basically, I think this country's lost track of teaching its, basically, the military core values are all instilled in the Constitution of the United States of America. And I think this country's lost that, that fundamental teaching to its children, you know, civics at the grade school level. I think that's what's causing a lot of division in this country. And basically, that's it. I mean, that's the unifying theory. That's the homogenizing effect that you're talking about. I wasn't born in the United States of America. I was born in Cuba. My family came to the U.S. fleeing socialism, communism. And what made me want to serve was that I had family members that were political prisoners, that were counter-revolutionaries. And they taught me from a very young age what was so great about this country. And that inspired me and motivated me to serve in combat arms. And furthermore, you were talking about what, and this is not to say that, you know, if you're not in a combat arms unit, that you're any lesser than a person that is, you know, a soldier that serves in a combat arms unit. But when you serve in combat arms, the more intense your purpose, the higher your objective, that in itself breaks down those discriminative and stereotypical barriers. You understand what I'm saying? It's something that, you know, combat arms vets, they understand that. That black and white thing, Hispanic, you know, or Latino white thing, or Latino black thing, it goes away the more intense and the higher your objective gets. You know, the more specialized your unit, you know, the more intense and you know, specialized your objective, that in itself breaks down the barriers. And I think the Constitution in itself is that intrinsic special, you know, that special thing that is gone away from society. We need to teach that. We need to teach the Constitution of the United States. I think that, you know, if you taught that to every children, irrespective of race, color, from a very young age, that would be a tremendous unifying factor.
Thank you.
For the United States of America, for this society that we're in now.
Thank you. Someone else from the audience have a contribution on that before we go back to the panel? I found that quite useful. Yes.
I think we need to look at it as more as we're evolving, and the Constitution can be a great support, or at least give support to people. But we also have to look at it as that we are, 200 years old. We're getting, we're mattering more and more. The global economic, economy is mattering more and more. And so, borderless. It's this idea of this globalization of individuals is mattering more and more. So I think there's a lot of fear out there as we're evolving into a more holistic globe and less of a border globe. And so I think the Constitution is great, but I also think it was written 200 years ago, and that we need to look at it. We got to take the good with the bad, and we have to be able to evolve as a country, as people, and I think that's okay for us to evolve and the Constitution to evolve in general. I think it's a great idea as long as it's pushing forward, good ideas.
I have a question for you. What portion or what part of the Constitution. Do you not agree?
Oh, no, I wasn't saying I disagree with any of the Constitution. I'm just saying that it is 200 years old, and when the more
Right,
that
but
we
if
grow.
you're saying it's 200 years old, and you're saying that it's lost some of its applicability, what I'm asking you is, what part?
Well, we have
applicability has it
amendments
lost?
that are in place of the Constitution that show that when we need to change, that we have these amendments come through that change with the Constitutions and what.
So what do you think needs to be changed for the Constitution?
I don't have an answer for
I
that.
think I can help just to put one thing on the table that people might consider, because it's, I think it's been brought forth several times, is the ERA. So an amendment that would give women, equal rights and guarantee them equal pay, that apparently does require an amendment to the Constitution. So there are some things that I think are up for debate and perhaps for change in our normal way of doing business. Does someone else have something to say about this question of how to transfer some of the policies or procedures or values of the military to American society before we go back to our panel?
Well, I have a
Yes.
question, but it's not related.
Oh, okay.
The question is what happens in the military if a person is to be a known racist or demonstrate sexist behavior? Does something happen to that person, or what's the
Yes,
course of action?
it's called the Uniform Code of Military Justice. That's roughly there's a million military personnel that's probably currently served now, a million, out of the population of the United States. We have policies, procedures that's outlined, and a violation of policy procedures can get you put in the stockade. Racial bias, gender bias, disobeying orders. The military is based on orders from superiors to subordinates. And as a subordinate, my duty is to carry that orders. It's job, issue orders. We took an oath to protect the Constitution. We took an oath in law enforcement as well. When you look at Army values, and you brought up a very important thing about Army values, it doesn't distinguish between what branch, whether you're in combat service or combat service support. We got the best military in the world. The best military in the world. I had the pleasure of being a senior enlisted advisor to all NATO forces. Their ambition is to try to duplicate the American military. We're the best paid, the best equipped, and the best trained in the world.
Well,
What happens?
I've got something that's gonna go towards your line, that's because my mind just constantly goes. And the question you're wanting is what in the military is gonna work in the civilian world?
Correct.
Right. And I went earlier and I said, you gotta break down, you gotta be brave enough to break down the institution and tradition like these two gentlemen have done. The structure that the military preaches is teamwork, and that teamwork is selfless service for the rest of the country. A few years ago, I coined my own term, there is no nobler thing than service to your fellow man. And when we start following that, when we start working together from preschool on up, that is when you're gonna see the world change, and you're gonna start breaking through cultural diversity in ways that will far surpass what Martin Luther King had to deal with. It'll be fast, it'll be so fast. We're still looking at the fight that he started. And you gotta understand something about Martin Luther King. A lot of people don't even know this, and I just recently learned this. He jumped a generation. He came out of the generation he was growing up with and to lead the next generation in breaking down cultural diversity. That's hard to do. It's hard to take. I'm 40 years old. I'm having an impact on, right now, on 18, 19, 20-year-olds. I'm having an impact on a 12-year-old daughter. All right? And when I talk to you, or when I talk, specifically when I talk to my daughter, I teach her to learn in her environment and to treat people equally. Now, sir, you don't pull your weight because you ain't getting involved in the conversation? Might not have time for you until you're ready on. And if you're willing to come back and get involved with that, then great. If you just want to sit in the sidelines, you may not be able to reap those rewards. But it comes down to that teamwork, that structure is what the military builds. Right from the get-go, you're all equal, we're gonna work together for one goal. And now, if you look at, since the United States has started looking that direction, you go back to World War I, when there was millions and millions of people killed on both sides, both military and civilian, to now everybody's at this huge atrocity that, the number's a little over 8,000, I think, that, how many soldiers were lost in Iraq, or currently, a little over 9,000?
Yeah.
And such an atrocity, we've lost 9,000. World War I and II lost millions, both civilian and military. It's about the structure. It's about our own propaganda.
I think this is a question on all this.
So, you had mentioned working with NATO forces, and I guess this is a question for all of y'all in there, because I asked myself the same thing. Obviously working with Iraqis, Afghanis, the Vietnamese. Julia, I think you were in Korea before at one point.
I've been in Thailand also.
We're in with
Been in
Thailand,
Afghanistan,
sure.
Iraq.
But we have diversity. Do you think that makes us stronger? Because I mean, if you look at other nations, it's not to be ignorant or bigoted, but you know, all the Iraqis are Iraqi. They don't have a problem with race. I mean, they have a problem with religion, but they don't have a problem with race. Or if you look at NATO nations, especially the more white areas of Sweden, Finland, Norway, Denmark, you know, they probably don't have the same questions we have, or the same situations that arise, the same questions or the same experiences. So, you know, do you think that diversity makes us stronger? And
Yes.
how?
Yes. It make, if you look at the British military, they have British citizens of Jamaican and Bahamian and descent. You look at the Canadian military, they have the same thing. You're absolutely right. When I talk to Hungarians, I talk to the Poles, even Germany now has some persons of color in the military. You look at those countries that are predominantly white, their primary concern is about how can I get paid like American soldiers, okay? How can I get the benefits of American soldiers? And how can I get the assignments that American soldiers get? Because when you said about the military, about we evolved from the British, but we took it a step further. No military in the world has given the responsibility to enlisted soldiers that the American military have given, regardless of ethnicity or gender. It's about responsibility based on your rank and grade.
I also think that perhaps what you're asking about is whether the diversity that exists in our armed forces and our society, for that matter, is a hindrance to a kind of more, I don't know why this phrase comes to mind, a more perfect union. And and one of the answers to that question has been that diversity allows us to have a greater international impact, because we can be in different, especially with the military, but even for other institutions, corporations, for example, we can be in different societies with people that look like the people from those societies and are able to engage them, at least that they feel that the person speaking to them is somewhat like them. So that may be a source of strength if put to use. Now, to the fundamental question I think that you're asking, though, is it worth the cost, or is it worth the price, or is it worth the investment? And I don't know that, one way that's tried to be answered, and I think this is where this conversation has been going for some time, is in affirmative action, right? So the major corporations in this country have decided, that they need to have representation of the diversity that exists in society to do business, even to be successful in the business environment. So I get the answer to a question like that seems to be not, is it a source of weakness, but how can it be a source of strength? How can we build upon it to make a society that works better for the society that we actually have, which is a diverse society? It's not like we're gonna ship the people who are not white off, well, maybe Trump might do that, but, you know, we'll ship them off to another planet, or bury them in the sea, or put a wall up, and we're here. So, given that we're here, and that's why I was asking the panel, and I really must ask the panel this question. One of you already answered the question. If you have one thing that you would say, take this back into civilian society and use it, incorporate it, just as this young man who stood up and said there's something fundamental about respecting the Constitution that needs to be put back in place. There's something fundamental about justice and respect that needs to be put back in place. If I could ask each one of you, just individually, is there some one thing that you think if it were incorporated, if it were built into, for example, that I could take back to my classroom tomorrow? I teach ethics. So that I could take back and say, this is important, this will help you and help our society be a more perfect union. What would that be?
I would say that all of you here are going to be in charge of something. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's a startup company, if it's if it's a section of some enterprise, or are you gonna be supervising somebody on the floor in the hospital, I mean, whatever it is. So when you find yourself in a position of power, then I think it's up to us. If we're going to change, it's up to the people who have the power to make the change. And I think Travis gave Leon and I too much credit for what we were able to accomplish in the time we had. I think we did a great job. You should have seen this guy. First thing is we took everybody out and we ran it. So I think first of all you do performance-based evaluation. So I'm telling you, there were some people who probably hadn't run that far in a long time. And then they came back and we told them that was day one. And we're gonna be back for another day. So some people decided to come see Leon and say, I think I'd like to retire. And then he had a little choir meeting with all the senior NCOs in this very large command, 2-star command. And he gave them the option of, we'll have a parade. We'll give you a medal. We'll be proud of you. But I've already looked at your records, and some of you need to go. So you can either come see me, or I'll come see you. And then we started making a difference. And then I didn't take everybody who was an officer with us when we went to war. So I evaluate everybody by their performance, about what they can do. And I think that's one thing we can do as a country, is let's take a look at who can do the best job, and then it doesn't matter. And then, you know what? When you're going to war, it focuses you, doesn't it? So you don't have time for the rest of the stuff. And I think if we would think about our jobs every day doing the best job we can, because we owe it to the people who rely on us to make decisions, I think it becomes easy. So, and then the last little thing I would say is, I like that. Bet on vets. I like that a lot. So, some of you out there have got to run for Congress, and you got to get elected, and we got to change some things around here. And I think, we have a whole generation of warriors. Well, I think we need to get in the business of making positive change and get in positions of power so that you can make the right thing happen. Then I think everything else will take care of itself.
Thank you. Commander, Kathy?
Respecting authority, respecting the rank that the person holds. Don't just look at the person's ethnicity or gender. Look at the rank that they and the responsibility that they have.
If I may, while you're in the middle of that thought, that shouldn't be directly equivalent to the biggest bullet on the block either.
No.
Just because I'm the craziest guy out there doesn't mean that I should be followed. I'm just being very specific about game-related issues, or cult-related issues, or religious-based issues. Just because that guy's going to go do anything, that woman's going to go do anything, it doesn't mean that that's the person that should be followed.
As a drill sergeant in the 70s and 80s, my job was to break soldiers down, because what we got criminals that were deferred prosecution given the option to come in the military. These young people coming in the military today are some of the most intelligent, physically fit that we ever had in the military. And so we need to honor their commitment, their I get calls all the time from parents about their kids going in the military. They'll, 1 out of 10 kids make it to the military. 1 out of 25 African-American kids make it in the military. The big distractors are obesity, lack of intelligence, folks came at past the AFA, grades were too low, and they're physically unfit.
So your prime recommendation?
Adapt the military's concept for its education excellence, physical endurance, mental, physical, and emotional stamina that it takes to do any job, whether it's the vice president of student affairs, or as I retired from law enforcement, director of law enforcement, for the Watson County Sheriff's Office. It takes a lot of stamina, and don't misconstrue the ethnicity or the gender of the person. Look at the position that they hold.
Thank you.
As a commander, yeah, as a commander, I've commanded on 3 occasions, and as a commander, when you come in, within 90 days, you do a command climate. And the first 90, the first 30 days, you're looking to see what's going on. And this command climate is initiated through a command higher than yourself, or you can initiate it earlier. And the responses that you get back tell you what's really going on, because the responses are anonymous. And you get the feedback to know really kind of what's going on with the unit. You get the heartbeat. My experience with those command climates.
If you could say just what is that?
A command climate is an equal opportunity policy that's in place. And that's the other thing about the Army. The Army has mandatory policies. We talked about these with mandatory training. EO, equal opportunity, consideration of others, is mandatory training that must be conducted at least once a year. In some divisions, some units, it could be twice a year, it could be once a quarter. It also has to do with what is your priority? What is your priority? You have 1,000 things you have to do. A 2-star commander has 1,000 things he has to do, okay? A battalion commander, a company commander has 1,000 things he has to do or she has to do. As a leader, you have to prioritize what is going to be your top 5. If this is important to you, it was important to me, and I didn't use it as a matter of black and white. I use it as a matter of treating people with dignity and respect and being fair and equitable. How do we do that? We do that by what's going on with the pulse of my unit? What's going on with my employees? What is going on that I don't know, that I don't see, that I don't hear, but I can find out in another way? And then I can use those tools, the systems in place, like EO, and start giving classes, and start making teachable moments during my training sessions. Those types of things to address if I have a race issue, if I have a fraternization issue, if I have anything else, a drug and alcohol issue. There are programs in place in the military that I can use to address those issues.
And you were saying that those tools can be used in the civilian environment?
Yes, they can be used in the civilian sector too, because you have an HRC, right? And HRC tends to have your sexual harassment policies and your alcohol and drug policies and all these other policies in effect. And that's the other thing, you have to be educated on those policies. If you're a supervisor, if you're a leader, you need to know what those policies are. And you have to remember too that your supervisor has priorities, so they may push that down on you. It just depended on what division I was in, or what brigade, or what battalion I was in. Hey, SHARP is only, and SHARP stands for sexual assault, the sexual harassment and rape prevention course. program. And as you know, that is an issue in the military, okay? And I'll just throw something else out there. There are just as many men that are raped than there are women, okay? And so if this is a mandatory program once a year, but I know that there are some issues coming out of my command climate, I'm probably not gonna do that once a year. I'm probably gonna make it a priority to do it 4 times a year, or maybe once a month. Or maybe every Thursday during my sergeant's time training, I'm gonna make a teachable moment and embed it in my training, embed it in how I'm talking to soldiers, in my one-on-one counseling, in my NCO mentorship programs, in my officer mentorship programs.
So what I hear you saying is continuous assessment.
Yeah, it's continuous assessment, because once you kind of think you get that under wraps, guess what? Something else is an issue, and then you have to address that. It's always changing and always evolving, and unfortunately, you'll go in one business organization or one unit, and you got that under wraps, but you got some drug problem, or you got something else going on that you have to address. And as leaders, that's what we're paid to do.
I guess what Colonel Wilson's saying too is, if I'm saying this right, is don't go tone deaf.
Yeah.
Don't get so absorbed in the fact that you gotta get this report out by tomorrow that you just keep putting off and not listening, because it does change. That was perfect. I mean, it is always evolving and changing. When you think you have something solved, you better go back and look at it again.
Mr. Clayton, one recommendation that you would make that, of what you've experienced or know about how the military handles or has handled this, made it more colorblind than the general society? One recommendation would you make for civilian society?
Well, when I was coming through training, the training actually wasn't long enough for you to really learn what they were trying to train you to do. It's just like going to Vietnam. I mean, we was trained for combat, but not given long enough time. They call it OJTs. Most people already know. But you need to really know what you're doing, where you headed, what's up front before you get over there. But that wasn't the way in the military. But they need to put more time in teaching people, training them in whatever field that they're in. And then respect all people. And listen to what somebody has to say, and don't try to belittle somebody.
Thank you.
Can I say this? He made a statement. What was the statement you made about black women?
Lots of black swimmers out there,
Okay,
but there are some.
when I was in the military, and I don't want everybody laughing, they taught us to swim. They carried us to the pool, and we stayed in the pool about 20 minutes. That's it. Was that enough time to learn how to swim?
No.
I still think so.
That's awesome. Travis? Sir. I gave mine, the structure.
Oh, that's right, you
The
did.
proper structure's gotta be there, and, we gotta give up on the color and the religion issue. Each their own. Somebody's hurting somebody else, you gotta step up. But, we gotta, again, I gotta agree with you, sir. There's people out there, your generation, at, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22 years old, some of these younger vets even. I had a senior vet say to me that he wanted me to, or one of his goals before he got out of where he was at was to see people underneath him that he was mentoring make it to the Congress and the Senate. And I said, well, that's not me. I might do it locally. But it's, if you see it and you know it's wrong and you feel it's wrong, you got to step up and lead. And if you're not going to step up and lead, then that ideal is never going to come to fruition.
Mr. Brown.
Sir, I actually thought I actually just wrote it down so I would not forget the simple point that I have, and it's just how we identify. And the in the back, you brought up the fact that we go back to the Constitution, something which we identify with. We threw around, we talk about the values and, you know, what you believe and stuff like that, and redefining our cores. And it comes back to just simply, how do we identify? I think one of the greatest unifying factor for service members is that we're service members. Regardless of all it entails, which is all of what we discussed earlier today, it's the training, the this, that, the different factors of whatever it is that make us service members. Now, how do we apply that to civilian life? How do we identify each other as civilians? I will share this with you, and this is, I guess, a global perspective. Several of my peers from other countries that I've spoken to, simply, they never knew or identified race until they came to the United States of America. And I'll share this with you. Coming from Jamaica, I have never in my life, on a sheet of paper, filled out anything had black, white, Hispanic, non-Hispanic, white, all this stuff. I have no clue what it was. Because simply there's two boxes. One that says Jamaican, the other that says other. You identify by nationality. It was that simple. And I will say, once I came to America, that's when I knew I was black. I never knew I was black. Go figure, right? I never knew that. I understood what people were in different regions, but I never knew I was black. And there is a stigma, call it for what it is, regardless of what race you are, and there's different things that we all walk around with, whether it's white and you walk around with just this unknown air of privilege that comes with you, or you're black and you think there's a stigma that's on you. And it's embedded in the American society, it's ingrained in it. And it's simply because we identify as everything else besides American. So how about we do away with the title and the categories and the how do we separate and divide people? How about we unite ourselves, like it says in the United States? How about unite each other around core principles and values that we identify to be American? And I think that is where the fundamental issue lies. And I think that actually, if you will, is my pitch for the solution, is identify as Americans than everything else in this world. And then we can start having some serious change.
It's not even just about color, though, or religion. It's about, if you listen to the way your political leaders talk these days, it's, I'm going to give you this for free, and I'm going to do this for businesses, and I'm going to do this for the middle class. You know, they break us down right from the get-go. These people that have been in charge, whether it's their families for decades, or senators that have been sitting in the Senate and they're 86 and they got to be wheeled into the freaking room to be there to be president. You know, the change starts with what you do, and if you don't like it, you got to move on. It's disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting.
Well, that could actually be the end of this panel discussion. However, we do have 10 minutes. And I wanted to give anyone in the audience an opportunity to ask a question or to make a comment that didn't have a chance to do so before we actually close out today. If anyone wants to take it.
Can we ask that question?
Yeah, actually, that'd be great.
You can. We have 9 minutes.
Okay, so we heard from 2 or 3 of you as to what you think some solutions might be to make changes. What are your suggestions, or what do you think might actually be a solution to this problem? Do you think there's a specific trait that service members have that you as a civilian think we have that could be applicable to making some changes?
Yes.
Ma'am.
So, I think that, well, from what we heard from you guys, one of the biggest problems is the lack of education or the lack of intelligence, which, like you were saying in the ASVAB, you know, you scored really high. And your peers, like if they didn't score high enough, or if they were just, you know, wasting space, they were treated differently. And so I think that that is also a reflection of our society and how society treats those who aren't as educated. So what do you propose, or you know, how do you think personally, like, that we could change that? Because I do think that it's a problem when we discriminate or when we have these prejudices against people who are less learned than us. And because in the end, I don't know their background. I don't know what opportunities they didn't have. And so I'm just the type of person that I would, you know, instead of saying, well, you're just a waste of space, like, I want to help you. You know, you don't know as much as I do, but I don't know as much as they do. You got to start somewhere. So how do you think that, you know, you can start that trend, I guess, or be that role model into society. Yeah.
I think of the soldier in the foxhole, okay? In the military, even though I don't care what that soldier does, we call them the subject matter expert, the SME, right? So you might have 10 different military occupational skills, or even more than that, maybe only one, maybe more than that, in one unit, okay? And as a leader, you're the manager of those people who are the resource. So they're your most important resource, right? And in the military, we don't treat that SME, that private, that grunt, what, you know, the names that they get sometimes, we don't treat them as if, you know, they're not part of the team. They're actually an intricate part of the team. I always went down to their level and asked them, hey, what can we do? What can I do for you? Are you getting the resources that you need? Are you getting the support that you need? How is your family? I mean, it's almost like, it wasn't just they worked in my unit, they were a part of my family. And their personal and professional development was important to me. I'm gonna make sure that you are making it to the next level. What do we have to do to make sure you get there? Holding the NCOs accountable to make sure that they're doing the proper mentorship. It goes back to the command team here saying, sometimes if the person isn't cutting it, you gotta get rid of them, because they're not taking care of the people that you're trying to lift up. That soldier that we have there at the very bottom, I always tell them, you're a private, you're a leader. And they'll look at me, what? You are a leader. So when you're in front of this formation, when you're given a task, take charge and be in charge. We're trying to develop them to take my place, to take his place, to take his place. Because in 20, 39 years, I'm done, you know? And someone else has to fill that role. So again, it goes back to the perspective of you. What are you gonna bring to your team? So if someone's just doing this, is it just them doing this? No. They're a part of that team. It goes back to the team concept too, I think we talked about. Everybody's a part of it. So what can you do to help that person? How can you move them to the next level? That's the only thing I can think of in transcending that to the public. And I mean, I've done that in a civilian sector and talking to people. I'm like, okay, what do you got to do to get here? What do we have to do to get you to these resources? That's what military leaders do.
Yeah, I definitely think that should be applied into our society, because we don't see each other as a team, and we as just a species, like, we are a team, you know, and that's how we should treat each other. So, thank you for your answer.
I think when you get a chance as a leader as well, I think you have to take the opportunity to make a difference. And so, as Leon knows, looking at Lieutenant Colonel Wilson, I think she's a damn good officer, serving you. And I think that we identified a young man by the name of Norm Green, who was Lieutenant Colonel at the time. And so when I was leaving on my final evaluation, I did Norm last. And I said that probably my career as an officer, I had rated thousands of officers. And if I could line them all up, he would be at the top. And so we were able to go and see Norm Green, on Brigadier General about 2 years ago in Texas, and he's African American.
Last question or comment from the audience?
Oh, kind of to the effect of what Bridget asked is, regardless of your ASVAB scores, you can go into the military and get a low ASVAB score and be limited to a certain amount of MOSs, infantry, any of the combat arms. But that low score doesn't dictate what you do thereafter after you join.
No, because you can retake it over.
Yeah, you can not only retake it over, but once you're in the military, it's all about how you perform. It's about what you put into it. It's about your grit, your determination, your motivation. Once you're there, the sky's the limit. I mean, you know, you can go to schools, irrespective of that, you can retake your ASVAB and work hard towards it, and I mean, you can go to different schools, achieve a lot of different things. So you're not limited, just because of an exam that you take initially. I didn't score high on the first time I took it, but I went and retook it and, realized I was a pretty intelligent guy and did a lot of other things, so you're not limited.
Well, I would like to thank all of you for a very enlightening discussion. I come away from this thinking that I should have joined the military. Maybe we would have had more opportunities for advancement and for self-expression than I thought.
Raise your right hand, repeat it.
Don't show me missing the phone though.
Yeah, that's actually what got me from, saved me from going to Vietnam. So it was a blessing in disguise now that I see that. But anyway, thank you very much for really an educational discussion. Thank you also the audience for asking questions that were provoked some informative responses. And I'd like to hand over back to the team, the Bets on Bets, to close us out.
Can I say one last thing?
Yes.
I went real big, real fast when I said it's our government that's the issue. And then I said that I had a mentor that said he's looking to put 2 veterans in the Senate or the Congress. And I said that wasn't me. And it's not me. I get very overloaded with that big monster that is our government. But where it does start is right now, locally in your community, what are you doing to impact your community in a very positive way? What are you doing to pay it forward? And I guarantee you that people come out of the military, because I'm one of them, and they're looking to pay that forward. And what I'm doing out at Hope with Horses Helping People and our Horses Helping Veterans program and putting veterans to work and giving them opportunities of community service out there is how I'm impacting the Alachua County area. Will I go in the government? I don't know. But I promise you, my wife's like, God, I hope not. But, I am doing the very best to put a ripple out there that's going to touch your lives or somebody's life that you know. And that's the challenge, is to be willing to change something at a small level that's going to have a greater effect later on.
Be the ripple.
And thank you again to all of our panelists and to Dr. Leslie for moderating. This has been great, and grateful to everybody for coming. We hope you can pull something really great out of this that you can take home as part of this really important topic. Make sure as you go, you can always go to betonveterans.com to see more of the veteran celebration that's going on. All the different content that's on there is going to be going on until March 15th. You can see all the things happening. So thank you again. Bet on Vets. They kick ass.
They kick ass.
They kick ass.
They kick ass.
Yeah, I had. No, fair enough. It's fine. Right.